Welcome to God and Country Biblical Exposition. As we have been following on the news, on April 2nd, what President Trump called Liberation Day, Trump imposed tariffs on foreign imports into America. He explained that since most countries charge tariffs on American goods, America would have reciprocal tariffs on these countries. Most countries would be charged 10% tariffs, but countries such as Japan, India, South Korea, that put 50% tariffs on incoming American products would have at least a 25% tariffs on their products coming into America. Tariffs on Chinese products would be raised to 54%. And the president's policy was sound economic policy. These countries are not engaged in free trade, but they are instead engaged in what are called predatory business practices to undermine American industry. The biggest crime is predatory pricing, where a company lowers its prices to put the competition out of business. The company and the employees may suffer in the short term, but eventually, through predatory pricing, they can corner the market, create a monopoly, and then raise prices. Once the competition is out of business, the competition startup costs to resume production become prohibitive, along with losing all of the intellectual capital and skill in their workforce. For example, if America loses its refineries to foreign competition, the cost and technology of restarting that industry is almost impossible. The same also goes for the auto industry. Other countries know this, and they do want to put America out of business, especially communist countries. China has been the worst culprit in this regard. They even manipulate their currency to undercut American prices. Rather than having a floating currency, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, has a fixed exchange rate. The Chinese dollar, the yuan, might be worth 50 cents for every dollar, but the CCP pegs it at about 14 cents. That makes it cheaper for Americans to buy Chinese products. That hurts Chinese businesses and workers, but the CCP doesn't care. They're using their workers to get American dollars and to achieve their goal of putting America out of business. The average factory worker in China should be making about $20,000 per year in American dollars, but they only make about $4,000 per year in American dollars. And of course, American businesses cannot compete with that. Either American manufacturers offshore their production to China, or they go out of business. So that now almost everything you buy is made in China. I have had Christmases where everything under the Christmas tree was made in China, and I'm sure you've experienced the same. 70% of all products at Walmart are made in China, and most of the rest come from India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Mexico. Even if you go into Home Depot and buy what is traditionally an American tool like DeWalt or Milwaukee, they're all made in foreign countries now because it's financially impossible to manufacture in America given the current predatory trade practices coming from other countries. If I were a businessman, I wouldn't bother starting a manufacturing business in America given all of the unfair trade advantages given to foreign products. I'd be a fool to start a manufacturing business in America. Now, it used to be that at least pharmaceuticals were made in America, but now even these drug companies have felt the economic pressure and have started to manufacture overseas. You can't be paying an American factory worker $50,000 a year if factory workers in China are making $3,000 a year. Even if workers in China may not be as productive or efficient, the company is still getting 15 Chinese workers for every one American worker. Now, don't make the mistake of thinking that this is merely a case of American greed and starving foreigners. That's the big delusion. This is a case of currency manipulation and predatory business practices. People in other countries, in a day of their labor, produce the same intrinsic wealth as people in America. The difference is mostly about how much their work is valued. And the difference is mostly a function of the value of the country's currency, not a function of actual labor. For example, a Chinese worker may earn $3,000 per year in American dollars, but a condo in China costs about $16,000 in American dollars. In America, we earn $50,000 a year, and a condo is about $250,000, $300,000. The ratio is still the same, 1 to 5. And it takes the exact same man hours to make the materials and to build the condo in China as well as in America. So why the difference in price? The monetary exchange rate, which can be corruptly manipulated so that one country can unfairly cut the prices in another country to take over an industry. Now, at this point, I know that I may be losing some of the audience. I have a background in economics, so I can geek out over all this. But the average person may not be so interested, may not even understand all this. And that's probably why most Americans and even most politicians ignore this economic corruption. They're economically ignorant and they're often morally naive. All they care about is being able to buy a cheap TV at Sam's Club, or 150 years ago, being able to buy cheap cotton shirts made by slave labor in the Deep South. But as Christians, we should appreciate that all of these trade issues involve Christian ethics and morals. Morals that are just as important as what the Bible says about sexual morality. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 35. You shall do no wrong in judgment, in measurement of weight or capacity. Deuteronomy 25:13. You shall not have in your bag differing weights, a large and a small. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a full and just weight. You shall have full and just measure, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. So there must be economic justice and parity. Also, Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 12, you have injured your neighbor for gain by oppression, and you have forgotten me, declares the Lord your God. Micah chapter 6, verse 11, can I justify wicked scales and a bag of deceptive weights? Proverbs chapter 11, verse 1, a false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 11, a just balance and scales belong to the Lord. All the weights of the bag are his concern. And that is a very powerful statement. It certainly counters any false teaching that God is not concerned with national economic policy. God is very concerned. How we use money reflects our relationship with God. In 1904, President Teddy Roosevelt broke up monopolies in America with bills such as the Sherman Antitrust Act. Why? I mean, why not just have one big national conglomerate like Samsung in South Korea? Because those business laws passed in America were laws based upon our Christian morals and our Christian worldview. A key text would be Isaiah chapter 5, verse 8, where the prophet says, woe to those who add house to house and join field to field until there is no more room, so that you have to live alone in the midst of the land. The prophet Isaiah is condemning monopolies. those who secure all authority and resources to themselves. It's morally wrong to monopolize resources, but communists and atheists operating on a secular worldview would ignore individual human rights. They would say, all within the state, nothing outside of the state, nothing against the state, individual ownership and rights do not matter. What matters is what advances the state. And the basis for morals and business ethics is state control. The power and the prosperity of the deep state bureaucracy, the elite rulers. So let's not take our Christian worldview for granted, as if individual economic rights are a given. No, there are many nations and even many people in America who have a Marxist communist outlook. And this is false teaching. This is sin. This is iniquity. This is evil. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is in a cold war against America. They really want to bring down America and dominate the world. And so they engage in predatory business practices to do it, practices which are actually illegal if committed in America. We couldn't do these things in America, but we look the other way when it comes to international trade. Because I think people believe that America, by doing this, is being charitable to the world. Now, as I mentioned, China manipulates their currency to undercut American products because they know what they're doing. They're slowly working to eliminate American manufacturing, and this will destroy the United States. And the CCP is glad that Americans are naive and Americans are letting them do this for now. But some American leaders are waking up, such as the current administration. I appreciate a recent Hoover Institute podcast. It was an interview with Frank Decatur, an expert in Chinese policy. It was entitled Empire of Illusions. And Decatur answered a very common question, a very common assumption. Is China simply pragmatic? Is it simply just being an economic powerhouse? Or are they really plotting something? To which Decatur explained that they are dedicated communists. And they have an agenda to defeat the United States. They truly believe in their communist vision to dominate the world, with China being on top. The fall of the Soviet Union and Soviet communism was an ideological defeat for the CCP, but they believe they can do what Russia failed to do. And those who believe that the CCP is altruistic in its motives are usually those on the left who don't believe in sin and human depravity. The CPC also uses their workers to accomplish their mission. The workers are seen as soldiers making economic sacrifices to defeat the United States. So the CCP will actually manipulate their currency and their business practices to effectively use the Chinese people as slave labor. And if you check this out online, factory workers in China still work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. They live in factory dormitories, rooms filled with bunk beds. And most of China still lives in abject poverty. Now, the claim is that China has lifted 100 million people out of poverty. Well, sure, the elites, but China's a country of 1 billion people. There's 900 million others who are still impoverished. For all of the work that the Chinese people do, Chinese families should all have mansions with all of the accoutrements. But Proverbs chapter 13, verse 23, abundant food is in the fallow ground of the poor, but it's swept away by injustice. There's not the wealth that would naturally be there in China if the Chinese people were free. Instead, the government reduces the value of the people's labor so they can achieve ideological objectives. A trade surplus with America so they can get American dollars to buy American assets and businesses and debt. And for all of the talk in communism about capitalism disenfranchising workers from the labor of their hands, communism and communist leaders are the biggest culprits in disenfranchising workers from the labor of their hands. The recent CCP reaction to American tariffs is that the CCP says Chinese workers are willing to suffer and should be willing to suffer to win this trade war with America. Again, they see their workers as soldiers suffering the hardship of war for their country because their whole economic policy is a Cold War against the United States, and many of our politicians don't realize this. So let's not be naive. There are evil actors in this world. There are evil people. There are evil false teachers operating whole nations. Now, America is not perfect, and we are losing our Christian base, but there's still a divide in this world between Christian countries and communist atheistic countries. And Satan would rather have all the countries in the world locked down into communism. So back to the news. After April 2nd, Liberation Day, the stock market plummeted. 25 years ago, if the president had put tariffs on foreign goods, the Dow would have skyrocketed. Went through the roof. But now with so many American companies having offshored their production and making money as retailers for foreign products, our stock market plummets. I mean, Nike can no longer make millions off of selling $10 shoes for $75. Economically, American businesses were soon going to collapse as a consequence of offshoring everything. But this is a little pain now to save our economy so we don't have greater pain later. However, the media and political partisans who understand none of these things are outraged. They complain that the sky is falling, that Trump is destroying the economy when actually he is more likely saving it. So after many foreign countries agreed to reduce their tariffs and to work out a deal with America, Trump reduced all tariffs temporarily to 10%. However, there is still a 25% tariff on all cars and car parts. Also, starting on May 2nd, Trump is ending the exemption for tariffs on small packages under $800, which has been a huge loophole to bring foreign products into America duty-free. This will really put an end to cheap imports destroying American businesses. Now, as far as China is concerned, since China did not reach out to America wanting to drop their protectionist tariffs against American products, and since China has retaliated by increasing their tariffs on American products, Trump raised the tariffs on Chinese products 80%. Then China retaliated again, and then Trump jumped the tariffs on Chinese goods to around 145%. I couldn't be happier. Let's just hope that Trump and the administration and the American people stand firm on this, because this is absolutely necessary. Not only because this is what we should do when we're running a trade deficit with any nation, but especially because China is a communist country which is in an economic war with the United States. Now, the title for this week's program is A Biblical Case for Why America Should Decouple from China, and that's what it's being called. It's not simply about tariffs. This is about our need to make our own products at home and to end Chinese imports. Now, last week I discussed the case for nationalism, tariffs, and protectionism. Tariffs protect national interests and sovereignty. Tariffs force countries to stop their predatory business practices, to produce products for their own domestic market, which will actually be better for America and for China. So here's the biblical case. In dealing with the Soviet Union, the United States had a policy of isolating Soviet Russia, not trading with Russia, because the basic assumption was that it's wrong to do business with evil. We should not enrich evil. Imagine if we opened up America to the Russian car market with all of the American dollars going into Russia. They could modernize their manufacturing, start making great cars. But America wouldn't do that because, as an a priori belief, Americans believe that we shouldn't engage in trade and enrich atheistic communist nations, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. But in the 1970s, the State Department and Richard Nixon, who are probably no longer operating on Christian assumptions, surmised that the way to turn China into democracy, into a free nation, is to do business with China, to make China rich. Then the Chinese and the CCP would see the prosperity of Western democracies and abandon communism, as if Western values are merely based upon free trade and economic liberty. Thus, the United States embarked on a completely different approach with China than as they had with the Soviet Union. And I'm not making this up. This is well known and documented, that the United States under Nixon abandoned their containment policy toward communist China. And back in 1979, under President Carter, Xi Jinping toured the United States and visited U.S. factories, and he returned to China with a vision to jumpstart Chinese manufacturing. And I remember as a new Christian back in 1979 seeing this as a 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 13 moment, when Hezekiah showed the emissaries from Babylon all the riches of Israel. 2 Kings 20:13, there was nothing in his house, nor in all of his dominion, that Hezekiah did not show them. And then the prophet of God arrived and rebuked King Hezekiah for his pride and foolishness, telling the king that because he did this, that someday Babylon would carry off all of Israel's wealth. Don't show your treasures to the enemy. That's common sense, which Carter didn't have. Then President Carter normalized relations with China and broke off relations with Taiwan, as the CCP insisted. This enraged conservatives in America because previously we only recognized Taiwan as being the true Chinese government in exile. Either Carter was naive or he was a communist at heart. And then Bill Clinton worsened the situation by allowing China into the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And China has violated WTO regulations ever since. Of course, because Americans should never have believed the promises and the lies coming from the Chi-Coms. So this change in policy wasn't just a change in neutral economic policy. This was a moral, spiritual change in America's worldview. And as we see, it's been a complete failure. China has not abandoned communism. In fact, if anything, it's doubled down on communism, because communism cannot be changed by materialism. It's a rejection of God and God's truth. It can only be changed by truth and evangelism. Enriching communism with trade only enslaves more people and strengthens communist leaders and their armies. Now, a key text in explaining why America should decouple from China is 2 Chronicles 19:2. Jehu, the son of Hananiah, the seer, went out to meet him and said to King Jehoshaphat, "Should you help the wicked and love those who hate the Lord, and so bring wrath on yourself from the Lord?" King Jehoshaphat from southern Israel went to help out King Ahab in northern Israel, who was being attacked by the Syrians, a common enemy both to the north and South Israel. The people of northern Israel were their fellow Jews, even though they were an ungodly nation being ruled by Ahab and Jezebel. And Jehoshaphat, by helping out northern Israel, helping them stop the Syrians, was indirectly helping his own country. So he thought. However, the prophet tells King Jehoshaphat that he did wrong in helping out northern Israel, and this brought the wrath of God down on King Jehoshaphat and all of southern Israel. And this statement from the prophet may come as a surprise to many, because Christians are accustomed to hearing texts like, love your enemies, do good to your enemy. By doing good to your enemies, you will reap coals of guilt upon them, and you'll change them for good, such as Romans chapter 12, verse 20. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him, and if he's thirsty, give him drink. For in so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. When Russia, the Soviet Union, was experiencing a famine in 1921, because they took the farms away from the farmers and gave them into the hands of Communist Party members, Herbert Hoover came to Russia's aid with huge shipments of food from America. Hoover actually saved communism from collapsing in Russia. And Hoover would later admit it was a mistake. It would have been better to allow the Bolsheviks to collapse on their own. Now, this can be debated. When it comes to feeding your enemy, at least your enemy remembers where the blessing is coming from. But Nixon, Carter, Clinton also saved the communist regime in China, saved it from collapsing by bolstering the Chinese economy. When it comes to normalized trade with national foreign enemies, two principles need to be applied. First, in regard to all charity, helping the wicked doesn't include helping the drunkard finance his tavern, or helping the prodigal son so that he can continue to live well and not return to the father. Second, the role of the individual in charity is different from the role of government in charity. As we see in Romans chapter 12, the individual Christian is not to take revenge, but then Paul turns around in chapter 13 and says magistrates are to be avengers against evildoers. So national righteous economic policy is 2 Chronicles 19:2. Do not help the wicked, because it will bring the wrath of God and the wrath of the ungodly down upon your land. Now, there's a lot more to be said about China and tariffs. It's actually good that China is being stubborn, because the worst thing would be for them to promise reforms and to play along with Trump, because in that the CCP would continue to be deceiving the West. China's economic system may soon collapse. There may be civil unrest. And Trump may be precipitating the fall of communist China, like Reagan used economic pressure to cause the fall of the Soviet Union. Already, the Chinese economy is suffering from a collapse in the real estate market, from a collapse in the population, a collapse in their currency, and now a collapse in their manufacturing. China, since they are losing trade with the U.S. anyway, may resort to going to war with Taiwan. All that's going to have to be discussed in another program, and hopefully soon. A closing lesson to take away from all this is that trade, money, wealth does not change people morally. What it takes is the gospel of Jesus Christ, truth, converting people, and teaching them to observe all that Jesus taught. And the Chinese church has been doing that. And by the power of the gospel, communism in China may soon end. Communism in the Soviet Union lasted only 70 years, and communism in China, which began in 1949, is at the 70th year mark. Well, thanks for listening. Be a champion of God's truth, and may Jesus Christ reign.